Yellowstone National Park, December 2019. A severe blizzard had just swept through the region. Park rangers urged the few remaining tourists to evacuate, but not everyone heeded their warnings. Three inseparable friends, Mason Reynolds, 24, Connor Pearson, 25, and Ethan Webb, 24, decided to brave the elements for what they called one last epic adventure before the new year. Self-proclaimed adrenaline brothers since their high school days in Portland, they had spent months planning this winter fishing trip to Lewis Lake, famous for its giant trout that seemed to grow even more voracious in the cold months. They weren't reckless, just confident. Mason's sister Olivia would later tell investigators, her voice steady despite the circumstances. They had invested in top-tier extreme weather gear and studied winter survival techniques for months. This wasn't an impulsive decision. The last confirmed contact with the trio came on the morning of December 14th. Mason sent a photo to Olivia, showing all three men smiling broadly in front of the partially frozen lake, their breath visible in the frigid air. The caption reads simply, "Nature challenges us, we accept." Their excitement was palpable, visible in their flushed faces and wide grins despite the biting cold that had already dropped to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. That same afternoon, an unexpectedly severe storm front moved in from the northwest, bringing winds exceeding 75 miles per hour and temperatures that plunged to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Park meteorologist Diana Westbrook would later classify it as the most intense December storm system recorded in Yellowstone in over 2 decades. Visibility dropped to near zero as the blizzard enveloped the southern portion of the park where the men had set up camp. When the three failed to check in or return by their scheduled departure date 3 days later, their families contacted park authorities. Olivia Reynolds was the first to sound the alarm, calling the ranger station repeatedly until they acknowledged the situation warranted immediate attention. "I knew something was wrong," she later told the PBS documentary series Wilderness Mysteries. Mason was meticulous about check-ins. "We had a system text by noon each day, even if it was just an emoji. When I got nothing for 72 hours, I knew." What followed was one of the most extensive search operations in Yellowstone's recent history. Chief Ranger Martin Calloway mobilized 6 search teams, including canine units specially trained for winter rescue operations. Local volunteers from West Yellowstone and Jackson joined the effort, bringing the total search personnel to over 60 individuals combing through the snow-covered terrain around Lewis Lake. Helicopter sweeps were attempted but hampered by continuing poor weather conditions. Even specialized drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras failed to detect any heat signatures that might indicate survivors. The search extended through Christmas and into the new year, with teams systematically covering a 5-mile radius from the trio's last known location. After 2 weeks of exhaustive searching in brutal conditions, not a single definitive trace of the missing men had been found. No equipment, no clothing, not even footprints preserved in the deep snow. The disappearance caught national media attention, with CNN broadcasting live from the park entrance as the search continued. True crime podcasters began speculating about the case almost immediately. Into Thin Air, one of the most popular shows in the genre, dedicated 3 consecutive episodes to the mystery, exploring everything from natural disaster scenarios to more sinister possibilities involving foul play. Dr. Raymond Hughes, a wildlife biologist who'd studied Yellowstone's ecosystem for over 3 decades, appeared on several news programs offering his assessment. The unique challenge with this case is the combination of extreme weather conditions and the presence of apex predators. When humans find themselves disoriented in these conditions, the outcome is rarely positive. As January 2020 progressed with no new developments, search resources were gradually redirected. Wyoming Conservation Department Superintendent Walter Cartwright issued a carefully crafted statement. While we remain committed to determining what happened to these young men, we must acknowledge the harsh reality of wilderness survival. The combination of sub-zero temperatures, treacherous terrain, and the presence of predators makes survival beyond a certain time frame virtually impossible. Our active search teams will be scaled back, though monitoring will continue. This official pivot toward presumed fatality devastated the families, but wasn't surprising to survival experts. Former Navy SEAL and wilderness guide Jack Donovan explained to a local news station, "Even with top-tier equipment, the human body can only withstand those conditions for so long. Hypothermia sets in rapidly, judgment becomes impaired, and the cascade of poor decisions begins. Add in predators that can detect vulnerability, and you have a perfect storm of fatal circumstances." The families of Connor and Ethan gradually came to accept the likelihood that their sons had succumbed to the elements. In a tearful press conference, Elizabeth Pearson, Connor's mother, expressed what many were thinking. "Our boys loved the wild and understood its risks. We need to accept that sometimes nature reclaims its own." Only Olivia Reynolds remained visibly skeptical of the natural disaster explanation. A graduate student in conservation biology at Colorado State University, she took a leave of absence to remain in Wyoming, renting a small cabin in West Yellowstone to continue what she called her independent investigation. Her persistent visits to the sheriff's office and ranger stations were initially met with patience and understanding. But as weeks turned to months, the sympathy in their eyes gradually transformed into something else, the uncomfortable pity reserved for those unable to accept painful realities. "I understand the stages of grief," Sheriff Deputy Thomas Wilkins told her during one of her visits in March. "But at some point, you need to consider the possibility that closure might not come in the form you're expecting." Behind closed doors, rangers and law enforcement exchanged concerned glances when discussing the Reynolds girl. One administrative assistant was overheard whispering, "Poor thing's in denial. Can't accept that her brother's gone." The Wyoming Tourism Board, concerned about the potential impact on park visitation, began running a series of advertisements highlighting new safety protocols, implicitly suggesting the case had been concluded as a tragic accident. Their spring campaign featured the slogan, "Yellowstone, wild but welcoming," a not-so-subtle attempt to reassure potential visitors that such disappearances were anomalous. By April 2020, with the COVID-19 pandemic shifting national attention elsewhere, the case was officially classified as presumed fatal due to natural causes and moved to inactive status. No bodies had been recovered. No definitive evidence of what had occurred had emerged, but the administrative machinery had made its determination. The case might have remained closed indefinitely if not for what happened nearly 5 years later. January 2024. An unusually fierce winter storm system had settled over northwestern Wyoming, bringing conditions that longtime residents described as biblical. Schools closed, roads became impassable, and even the hardiest locals found themselves housebound. Harold Blackwood, a 63-year-old veteran hunter and respected wilderness survival guide, was leading an authorized expedition for elk population control when he became separated from his group. With night falling and temperatures plummeting, Harold faced a life-or-death decision. "I've survived 3 winters lost in the Bitterroots," he later recounted to authorities. "You learn to recognize when pride needs to take a backseat to survival." Seeking shelter from the intensifying blizzard, Harold identified what appeared to be the entrance to a bear den beneath a rocky outcropping partially covered by snow. Desperate to survive the night, he cautiously entered the cave, prepared for a potential confrontation with its owner. Inside, he found an adult male grizzly in deep hibernation. As he carefully backed away, his flashlight beam caught something unusual partially buried in the dirt floor of the cave. A flash of synthetic material that seemed out of place in the natural environment. What Harold discovered sent shockwaves through the community and reopened a case many had considered long resolved. There, partially buried in the bear's den, were the deteriorated remains of a high-performance extreme weather tent. The fabric was torn in several places and showed what appeared to be dark, dried stains. More disturbing still, Harold identified fragments of what looked like high-end fishing equipment and pieces of a human-made snow boot. Harold managed to photograph his discovery before retreating from the cave. When park authorities finally accessed the den after sedating the bear, they confirmed through serial numbers and identification remnants that the items belonged to the 3 young men who had vanished in 2019. The official theory quickly crystallized. The men had been caught in the blizzard, possibly already injured or disoriented, and attacked by the bear, which dragged their bodies and equipment back to its den. Gregory Winters, the park's chief of wildlife preservation, issued a statement. This appears to be a classic case of predation. The bear, likely not fully hibernating during the 2019 blizzard, encountered the victims in a vulnerable state. The behavior of dragging prey to dens is well documented, especially when preparing for hibernation. Media outlets embrace the narrative with headlines like "Mystery Solved," "Grizzly confirmed as culprit in Yellowstone case." Wyoming's governor praised authorities for finally bringing closure to the families and announced a review of safety protocols in areas known for bear activity. The bear itself, an 8-year-old male nicknamed Thunder by rangers, was relocated to a remote reserve, a decision that sparked heated debates between conservationists and those who called for the animal to be euthanized. Case closed. Again, except for one person who remained unconvinced. Olivia Reynolds had never fully accepted the disappearance of her brother. Now working as a research assistant on a wildlife monitoring project in Colorado, she immediately traveled to Wyoming when she learned of the discovery. While others accepted the official explanation, something in the report triggered her professional skepticism. The timing simply doesn't add up, she confided to Dr. Marcus Lehman, her former professor of animal behavior. Pre-hibernation bears do cache food, yes, but they rarely drag entire prey to their permanent dens. And the location? That den is almost 11 miles from the last known point where my brother was. 3 bodies dragged that distance would have left signs impossible to miss during the searches. When she requested access to Harold's original photographs and the complete autopsy report on the material, Olivia encountered surprising bureaucratic resistance. Only after threatening legal action did she receive partially redacted copies. Examining the images meticulously, Olivia noticed something disturbing. The tear marks on the tent didn't match the pattern of bear claws. These cuts are too linear, almost as if made by a knife, she noted in her investigation journal. Additionally, fabric fragments attached to one of the equipment pieces showed signs of degradation that didn't correspond to 5 years of natural exposure. More intriguing still, in one of Harold's photographs, partially blurred in the corner, Olivia recognized what appeared to be a handcrafted bracelet identical to the one she had given Mason before the trip, made with a unique pattern of indigenous beads. The official report made no mention of this item. With these growing doubts, Olivia took unpaid leave from her job and temporarily relocated to the small town of West Yellowstone, determined to discover what really happened to her brother and his friends. Her investigation naturally led her to Harold Blackwood, the man who found the tent. Researching his background, she discovered that Harold had a controversial history. 10 years earlier, he had been investigated in connection with the disappearance of 2 backpackers in the Bitterroot region, though he was never formally charged due to lack of evidence. More troubling, Harold operated a guided hunting business that had faced financial problems following allegations of unethical practices. Several local guides whispered to Olivia that Blackwood was known for taking tourists to restricted areas of the park in exchange for premium fees. "Blackwood knows those mountains better than anyone," confided Rebecca Tanner, a local restaurant owner. "If someone could transport bodies 11 miles without leaving traces, it would be him." When Olivia attempted to interview him, Harold initially appeared cooperative but visibly uncomfortable with specific questions about exactly how he had found the den. It was survival instinct, nothing more, he insisted, refusing to provide details about his exact route that day. Olivia's suspicions seemed confirmed when she discovered that Harold had registered a new adventure tourism company just 3 months after the young men's disappearance, using a substantial capital injection whose origin he couldn't satisfactorily explain. Yet something still didn't feel right. If Harold was responsible, why would he report finding the evidence at all? He could have simply left the cave without documenting anything, and the timing 5 years later seemed oddly coincidental. While investigating Harold, Olivia received unexpected support from Travis Montgomery, a senior park ranger who had led the original searches in 2019. Travis, a respected 40-year-old man with 2 decades of service in the park, offered to help her unofficially. "It always bothered me that we found absolutely nothing," Travis confided to Olivia during one of many coffees they shared. "In 20 years of search and rescue operations, I've never seen 3 people disappear so completely," Travis became Olivia's pillar of support, providing access to internal reports, introducing her to useful contacts, and offering comfort in moments when the weight of the investigation seemed overwhelming. "Your brother deserves justice," he repeated. "And you deserve answers." It was Travis who suggested that Olivia investigate a series of unrelated disappearances in national parks over the past 8 years, cases filed away as sudden natural accidents or animal attacks. It was also he who helped her map the weather patterns of the 2019 blizzard, demonstrating possible routes and shelter locations. "If we're going to find the truth," Travis told her one evening as they pored over maps spread across his office desk, "we need to understand not just where they were, but where they could have gone, and more importantly, where they couldn't have gone in those conditions." His eyes reflected the dim light of his desk lamp as he traced a finger along a contour line. "Something has never felt right about this case, and I've learned to trust that feeling." As winter deepened around them, Olivia couldn't help but wonder if this time, finally, she was on the right track to discovering what had really happened to Mason, Connor, and Ethan on that snowy December day. Olivia's investigation gained methodical precision in the weeks that followed. She established a small workspace in her rented cabin, covering one wall with a detailed topographical map of Yellowstone's southern region. Red pins marked the last confirmed location of the 3 friends, while yellow string traced possible routes they might have taken during the blizzard. A blue pin indicated the distant bear den where their belongings were discovered 5 years later. The physical distance between these points represented her central question. How could 3 bodies and their equipment travel 11 miles through rugged terrain without leaving a single trace during the original search? Travis Montgomery became her most reliable ally, often stopping by after his ranger shifts with coffee and occasionally new information gleaned from park records. His 20 years of experience provided insights that would have otherwise remained inaccessible to Olivia. "The thing about winter in Yellowstone," Travis explained one evening as they reviewed weather data from December 2019, "is that it creates a paradox for predators. Food becomes scarce, but hunting requires precious energy. Bears especially, they're in conservation mode by mid-December, their metabolism slowing dramatically as they prepare for hibernation." He tapped the location of the den on the map. "A bear dragging prey that distance in December defies typical behavior patterns. They're efficient creatures, they minimize exertion when food stores are running low." This professional assessment reinforced Olivia's skepticism. As an ecologist herself, she understood the fundamental principle of energy conservation in wildlife. Predators don't expend unnecessary calories, particularly before hibernation. With Travis's help, Olivia began mapping other disappearances in national parks throughout the region over the past decade. A pattern emerged: 8 cases classified as accidents or animal attacks where bodies were never recovered or found in unusual circumstances. The cases shared unsettling similarities. Experienced outdoors people who vanished during adverse weather conditions, minimal evidence recovered, and investigations quickly concluded as natural causes. It's like watching the same play with different actors, Olivia told Travis, her finger tracing connections between the cases on her growing evidence board. The script barely changes. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. After weeks of persistent requests, Olivia finally secured an interview with Diane Mendez, a retired meteorologist who had worked at Yellowstone during the 2019 blizzard. Meeting at a quiet cafe in Bozeman, the older woman brought with her something invaluable, her personal weather journals and satellite imagery from the day of the disappearance. "I've kept these records for 30 years, Diane explained, spreading printouts across the table. The park's official records are comprehensive, but they don't tell the whole story. Microclimates in Yellowstone can create dramatically different conditions just miles apart." As they reviewed the data together, Diane pointed to a satellite image showing the storm system. "See this formation? The mountains here created a unique wind shadow. This entire valley, including the area where the bear den is located, experienced substantially milder conditions during the height of the storm." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. So if the three of them were seeking shelter from the blizzard, they wouldn't have headed toward that area. Diane completed her thought. It makes no logical sense. Anyone with basic wilderness training follows valleys downward during whiteout conditions, not across elevated terrain toward a different watershed. And certainly not 11 miles in the opposite direction from their planned extraction point. This contradicted the entire foundation of the official narrative. If the friends weren't disoriented by the blizzard in that area, what had brought them or their belongings to that distant bear den? Armed with this meteorological evidence, Olivia approached Sheriff James Harker, who had jurisdiction over criminal investigations in the region. Initially reluctant to revisit a closed case, Harker's interest was piqued by the weather data. "I'm not saying we're reopening anything," he cautioned, leaning back in his chair at the county sheriff's office, "but I'll have my forensics team take another look at Blackwood's photographs. If there's something inconsistent with animal predation, we should know." 3 days later, Olivia received a call from the sheriff's office. The forensic analyst had identified several anomalies in the photographic evidence. The tears in the tent fabric showed patterns inconsistent with bear claws, too precise, too linear. More concerning, magnification revealed what appeared to be cut marks on visible equipment fragments that were characteristic of knife damage, not animal teeth. "This doesn't prove anything criminal," Sheriff Harker warned when Olivia rushed to his office. "But it does warrant further examination of the physical evidence." When authorities returned to the bear den to collect samples for laboratory analysis, they made a discovery that transformed the investigation. Beneath the partially buried tent fabric, forensic technicians recovered small fibers that testing would later confirm came from Park Service issued winter gloves, standard equipment for rangers, but not something the three friends had been carrying according to their equipment inventory. While the evidence was being processed, Olivia continued her parallel investigation into Harold Blackwood. His discovery of the bear den had initially made him the focus of her suspicion, but inconsistencies in this theory troubled her. If Harold had been responsible for the disappearances, why would he voluntarily bring attention to evidence that could implicate him? And why wait 5 years? Travis suggested they visit the local hunting outfitters where Harold occasionally worked. The shop owner, Mike Callahan, had known Harold for over 30 years. "Harold's got his faults," Mike acknowledged as he restocked ammunition behind the counter. "He's cut corners on permits, taken clients off trail when he shouldn't. But there's a difference between bending rules and harming people. The man couldn't even bring himself to put down his own hunting dog when it was suffering from cancer last year." This assessment aligned with what Olivia had been hearing from others in the community. Harold was a rule-bender with a questionable ethical compass regarding wildlife regulations, but there was no evidence of violent tendencies or personal connection to Mason, Connor, and Ethan. As winter deepened, Olivia's investigation began to attract unwanted attention. She noticed a black SUV parked across from her cabin on multiple occasions. Anonymous emails appeared in her inbox suggesting she honor her brother's memory by letting him rest in peace. The implied message was clear. Someone wanted her to stop digging. Travis dismissed her concerns about surveillance as paranoia born from exhaustion. "Small towns run on gossip," he explained. "Everyone knows what you're doing here. Doesn't mean they're watching you specifically." Yet Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. One morning, she discovered her cabin had been entered while she was out. Nothing was taken, but her investigation materials had been subtly rearranged. When she mentioned this to Travis, he suggested setting up wildlife cameras around the property, ostensibly to identify nocturnal visitors. Could be just curious locals, he reasoned, but better safe than sorry. The institutional resistance to her investigation intensified when Walter Cartwright, the regional superintendent who had pushed for the case's closure back in 2020, called Olivia to his office. The meeting was positioned as a courtesy, but his message carried unmistakable warning. "Ms. Reynolds," he began, hands folded on his immaculate desk, "I understand grief can make us grasp at alternatives to painful truths, but you should consider the impact of your activities. Tourism is the lifeblood of communities surrounding this park. Suggesting that something sinister happened to your brother rather than a natural, if tragic, animal encounter has consequences for local businesses." When Olivia mentioned the new forensic evidence, Cartwright's expression hardened. Inconclusive findings often lead to false hopes. The Park Service stands by its assessment. Later that day, Olivia received an unexpected visitor at her cabin. Elizabeth Pearson, Connor's mother, had driven from Idaho after hearing about the reopened investigation. "I saw it on the news," she explained, clutching a cup of tea with trembling hands. "They said new evidence suggests it wasn't a bear attack. I had to come." The two women had met during the original search but had fallen out of contact as their grief took different paths, Elizabeth toward acceptance, Olivia toward questioning. Now, sitting in the small cabin, Elizabeth shared something she had never told investigators. "Connor called me the night before they disappeared," she said quietly. "He mentioned they had met a ranger who offered to show them a secret fishing spot the next morning. Someone who knew the park intimately." Olivia felt her pulse quicken. "Did he mention a name?" Elizabeth shook her head. "Just that the ranger had been there for decades and knew places tourists never found. Connor was excited, said this guy had shown them his collection of antique fishing lures and promised to take them somewhere special at dawn." This new information sent Olivia back to the park employment records Travis had helped her access. Searching for rangers with long service records and potential connection to the area where the Palazzo, three friends had been camping, she compiled a list of 7 individuals. Travis's name was among them, but so were several others with extensive experience in the park's southern region. The physical evidence from the bear den finally yielded its secrets 3 weeks later. The forensic analysis revealed trace amounts of a powerful veterinary sedative on the fabric fragments, edorphine, a drug thousands of times more potent than morphine, used by wildlife management teams to tranquilize large animals. Access to such substances was strictly controlled and limited to specific park personnel trained in wildlife management. Sheriff Harker called Olivia personally with this information. "This changes the equation," he admitted, his voice grave. "Accidental ingestion of this substance would incapacitate a human almost instantly. And it's not something those boys would have had in their possession. Who would have access to it?" Olivia asked, already suspecting the answer. "Limited park personnel. Primarily the wildlife management team and senior rangers with specialized training." The investigation shifted dramatically with this revelation. Search warrants were issued for the personal vehicles and properties of park employees with access to controlled veterinary substances. Travis assured Olivia this was standard procedure. Everyone with access would be investigated equally. "It's how we eliminate possibilities," he explained as they shared dinner at a local diner. "Most likely, this will trace back to some cross-contamination from routine wildlife management operations. Perhaps they set up camp near an area where animals had recently been tranquilized." But Olivia had begun to notice subtle changes in Travis's behavior. His previously unwavering support occasionally gave way to suggestions that they might be reaching dead ends. He began mentioning the emotional toll the reinvestigation might be taking on her, suggesting that sometimes closure comes from acceptance rather than answers. Her instincts as a researcher told her something wasn't aligning, but she couldn't identify what was troubling her. Travis had been nothing but helpful, providing access and insights that had advanced her investigation significantly. The investigation took another turn when the lab analyzing the tent fabric made an additional discovery. The degradation pattern of the material was inconsistent with 5 years of exposure. Microscopic analysis suggested the fabric had been exposed to the elements for a much shorter period, perhaps only a year or two, before being placed in the relatively stable environment of the bear den. This revelation shattered the timeline of the official narrative. If the tent hadn't been in the den since 2019, someone had placed it there much more recently. Olivia's suspicions about Harold Blackwood resurfaced. Perhaps he had found the evidence elsewhere and moved it to the bear den for dramatic discovery? But this theory still didn't explain the presence of the veterinary sedative or the Park Service glove fibers. As she grappled with these inconsistencies, Olivia received an unexpected call from Rebecca Tanner, the restaurant owner who had previously shared rumors about Harold Blackwood. Her voice was hushed, urgent. "I saw you talking to Travis Montgomery at the diner yesterday," Rebecca said without preamble. "Be careful around him." "Travis? He's been helping me investigate. That's what concerns me," Rebecca continued. "Listen, I've lived here 30 years. Travis has always been off. Nothing I can prove, just instinct. The way animals react to him. Did you know he was reprimanded back in 2011? A group of climbers ignored his warning about conditions being too dangerous. When they made it through safely, he completely lost it at them in public. Had to be physically restrained by other rangers." After the call, Olivia found herself reviewing every interaction with Travis with new scrutiny. Had his helpfulness been genuine, or had he been monitoring her investigation, guiding it away from himself? The wildlife cameras he had installed around her cabin, were they for her protection or her surveillance? That night, unable to sleep, Olivia began cross-referencing Travis's work schedules with the dates of other mysterious disappearances she had been tracking. What emerged chilled her more than the Wyoming winter outside her window. In 6 of the 8 cases, Travis had been either directly involved in the search efforts or working in the vicinity when the incidents occurred. Coincidence wasn't proof, she reminded herself, but patterns couldn't be ignored either. The next morning, Olivia received a text from Travis. "Need to show you something important. Found records that might explain the sedative. Meet at my cabin 7 p.m. His property was remote, accessible only by a service road rarely used in winter. Olivia hesitated, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. She had shared her suspicions with no one. Making a decision, she called Sheriff Harker, explaining her concerns and Travis's invitation. "I'm probably overreacting," she finished, "but if I'm not, I don't want to disappear like my brother." Harker's response was measured. "Don't go to that meeting. Come to my office first thing tomorrow. There's something you should know about the search warrants." Before she could ask what he meant, Harker continued, "The forensics team found something when they searched Montgomery's service vehicle. Fibers matching the tent material discovered in the bear den. They were adhered to the underside of his truck bed with what appears to be the same sedative found on the tent fragments." Olivia's mind raced, connecting dots that had been scattered across her investigation for months. Travis's intimate knowledge of the park's remote areas, his access to controlled substances, his involvement in the original search that found nothing, his convenient appearance in her life just when she had begun questioning the official narrative. "We're bringing him in for questioning tomorrow morning," Harker continued. "Until then, stay somewhere he wouldn't expect to find you. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even me over this line." As darkness fell over Yellowstone, Olivia packed essential belongings and the core of her investigation materials. Through her window, she could see fresh snow beginning to fall, nature's blank canvas erasing traces, just as it had 5 years earlier when her brother vanished. Her phone chimed with another text from Travis. "Are you coming? Found something you really need to see." She didn't respond, but as she prepared to leave, a new message appeared. "I can see your lights on, Olivia. I know you're home." Fear crystallized into certainty. Travis wasn't just involved. He had been watching her all along. As she slipped out the back door into the falling snow, Olivia finally understood what her brother and his friends must have felt in their final moments. The devastating realization that the person they trusted to guide them through the wilderness had become their predator. The true nature of the beast that had stalked Lewis Lake in December 2019 wasn't a bear seeking hibernation. It wore a uniform, carried a badge, and had spent years hiding behind the perfect camouflage, the very authority tasked with protecting visitors to America's most famous national park. The motel on the outskirts of Jackson Hole offered the anonymity Olivia needed. Using cash and checking in under a false name, precautions that would have seemed paranoid just weeks earlier, she settled into a sparse room with faded wallpaper and a view of the parking lot. Sleep eluded her as her mind processed the implications of what Sheriff Harker had shared. Travis Montgomery, the ranger who had earned her trust and guided her investigation, had potentially orchestrated her brother's disappearance. Around midnight, her burner phone, purchased that evening from a truck stop, rang with a number she recognized as Sheriff Harker's personal line. "We executed a search warrant on Montgomery's property an hour ago," Harker said without preamble, his voice tense. "He wasn't there, but what we found—" "You need to prepare yourself, Ms. Reynolds." In the background, Olivia could hear radio chatter and the sounds of vehicles and operations still in progress. "We've established a command center at the station. I'm sending a deputy to bring you in safely. Don't open the door for anyone else." The 20-minute drive to the sheriff's station passed in eerie silence, the deputy respectfully giving Olivia space to process what little she knew. The station hummed with unusual activity for the late-hour deputies in tactical gear. FBI agents who had been called in from the field office in Cheyenne, forensic technicians preparing equipment. Sheriff Harker met her in a conference room that had been transformed into an investigation hub. Maps covered one wall similar to Olivia's own research space, but with a precision and scope that dwarfed her efforts. Photos were being pinned to a large evidence board, some from Travis's property, others from case files spanning nearly a decade. "We found a concealed bunker beneath his workshop," Harker explained, his weathered face grim, "accessible through a trapdoor disguised as an equipment storage hatch. The construction is sophisticated reinforced concrete, independent power system, ventilation." This wasn't something built on impulse. He hesitated before sliding a folder across the table. Inside were items belonging to at least 7 different individuals, all reported missing in national parks over the past 8 years. All cases were classified as accidents or animal attacks. All closed. Olivia opened the folder with trembling hands. The photographs documented a meticulously organized collection. Wallets, identification cards, personal jewelry, watches, cameras, all cataloged with dates and locations. Among them, she recognized Mason's distinctive titanium compass watch, a graduation gift from their parents. Next to it lay Connor's silver St. Christopher medal and what appeared to be Ethan's university class ring. "There's more," Parker continued quietly. "We found detailed journals. The content is disturbing." He documented everything. The journals revealed a methodology both calculated and chilling. Travis selected his targets based on specific criteria, primarily experienced outdoor enthusiasts whom he perceived as overconfident or disrespectful of nature's dangers. He would observe them for days, studying their habits and vulnerabilities. When conditions aligned, typically during adverse weather events that would limit witnesses and complicate future searches, he would approach them in his official capacity. His position as a trusted authority figure allowed him to gain their confidence. Sometimes he offered to show them hidden features of the park or specialized fishing and hunting locations. Other times he would arrive as if by chance when they were already in distress, presenting himself as their rescuer. The veterinary sedative Ederfine was his weapon of choice. Easily administered in food or drinks, it rendered victims unconscious within minutes. Travis would then transport them to remote locations where he subjected them to what he called wilderness trials, abandoning them in hostile conditions, sometimes partially sedated and disoriented, other times physically compromised. FBI Special Agent Catherine Lerner, who had been called in to lead the federal aspects of the investigation, summarized the psychological assessment they were developing. He positioned himself as nature's arbiter, she explained to Olivia and the assembled team. In his mind, he wasn't killing these people, he was allowing nature to pass judgment on them. Those who survived his trials would have proven their respect for the wilderness. Of course, given the conditions he engineered, survival was virtually impossible. The most disturbing section of Travis's journals concerned Mason, Connor, and Ethan. Unlike his other victims, whom he had abandoned in wilderness locations, Travis had taken a different approach with the three friends. He kept them separated, Agent Lerner continued, her professional demeanor barely concealing her revulsion. According to his notes, he told each of them that their survival would determine whether their friends lived or died, creating a psychological torture where each believed they were responsible for the others. What the journals revealed about Mason's final days was almost unbearable for Olivia to hear. Travis had kept her brother alive for nearly a week in his bunker, documenting what he called the fascinating psychological deterioration when hope transforms to absolute despair. He had fed Mason false information about his friends' fates, recording his responses with clinical detachment. By dawn, a multi-agency manhunt was underway for Travis Montgomery. His service vehicle had been found abandoned near the eastern entrance to Yellowstone, suggesting he had fled on foot into the backcountry he knew so intimately. Thermal imaging drones, K-9 units, and tactical teams were deployed, but the vastness of the wilderness offered countless hiding places for someone with his expertise. As the search expanded, forensic teams continued processing Travis's property. Below the workshop where the bunker had been discovered, ground-penetrating radar identified an elaborate system of tunnels extending into the surrounding forest. Following these passages, investigators made a grim discovery, a secondary chamber where Travis had conducted what his journals referred to as extended studies. This is where he kept those he selected for longer observation, Agent Lerner explained during a briefing later that day. The chamber contains evidence of restraint systems and crude but effective methods for maintaining victims in controlled conditions. The forensic evidence suggested that Mason had spent his final days in this underground prison. DNA matching his profile was recovered from the restraints, along with traces of Connor's and Ethan's DNA in adjacent areas. Investigators determined that Travis had maintained this facility for years, gradually expanding it between his episodes of violence. The manhunt for Travis Montgomery continued for 3 tense days. Despite deploying the most advanced search technology available, including military-grade thermal detection equipment borrowed from Fort Carson, authorities struggled to locate him in the wilderness he knew as intimately as his own home. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Harold Blackwood, the hunter who had discovered the evidence in the bear den, approached investigators with information he had initially withheld. "I didn't just stumble into that cave by accident," he admitted to Sheriff Harker and Agent Lerner. "I received an anonymous letter with GPS coordinates and a cryptic message. The truth about the 3 fishermen is here. I thought it might be a prank, but when the blizzard hit and I found myself in that area, I decided to check." The letter, which Harold had preserved, was subjected to handwriting analysis and forensic examination. The results were conclusive. It had been written by Travis Montgomery. "He wanted the evidence found," Agent Lerner theorized. "The question is why, after 5 years of successful concealment?" The answer emerged from a deeper analysis of Travis's journals. In entries dated approximately 6 months before Harold's discovery, Travis documented a cancer diagnosis terminal with limited treatment options. Subsequent entries revealed a man grappling with his mortality and legacy. "It appears he was setting up an endgame," Agent Lerner explained, "creating a controlled revelation that would allow him to observe the investigation while maintaining his cover. The evidence placement was deliberate enough to resolve the disappearance, but engineered to support the bear attack narrative." What Travis hadn't anticipated was Olivia's persistence and scientific skepticism. His carefully constructed explanation had unraveled not because of a flaw in his planning, but because he had underestimated his sister's determination to uncover the truth. On the 4th day of the manhunt, a park maintenance worker reported unusual activity at an abandoned fire observation tower in the northeastern section of Yellowstone. The tower, decommissioned years earlier after being damaged by lightning, had been considered structurally unsafe and removed from regular patrol routes. Tactical teams surrounded the location before dawn. As first light broke over the mountains, they observed Travis emerging onto the tower's observation deck. He carried a rifle and wore full winter gear, appearing calm and alert despite the sub-zero temperatures. The standoff lasted hours. Negotiators attempted to establish communication, but Travis remained silent, occasionally training his rifle on approaching teams but never firing. As dusk approached, he finally responded to the loudspeaker communications. What followed wasn't the expected negotiation but a chilling monologue. Travis spoke clearly into the gathering darkness, his voice captured by directional microphones positioned by the tactical team. "You think you understand what happened, but you don't," he began. "Those boys were emblematic of everything wrong with modern humans in wild spaces. They brought their expensive gear and their artificial confidence, believing technology would save them from any situation. Nature deserves more respect than that." He paused, surveying the encircling teams below. "I didn't murder anyone. I simply removed the artificial advantages and let nature render judgment. Some lasted hours, others days. The Reynolds boy was particularly disappointing. All that bravado dissolved into begging within the first 48 hours. The standoff concluded as night fell completely. Whether Travis jumped or lost his footing in the darkness remains unclear. His body was recovered from the base of the tower, the fall from over 80 feet leaving no possibility of survival. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Travis Montgomery's crimes. Forensic evidence from his bunker, journals, and electronic devices connected him to 12 deaths across 5 national parks, all previously attributed to accidents, exposure, or animal attacks. Investigators identified a pivotal moment in Travis's psychological decline, an incident in 2011, when he was publicly humiliated after issuing emphatic warnings to a climbing group about dangerous conditions. When the climbers successfully completed their expedition without incident, they mockingly thanked the paranoid ranger in front of tourists and colleagues. The incident resulted in an official reprimand for excessive alarmism, and marked the beginning of Travis's obsession with proving nature's supremacy over human arrogance. His methodology evolved over time, becoming more sophisticated and leaving fewer traces. He selected moments of extreme weather conditions when oversight would be minimal. He utilized his official vehicle and knowledge of unmonitored service roads to transport victims. Most critically, he exploited his role in subsequent search operations to ensure evidence was overlooked or misinterpreted. It was the perfect closed loop, Agent Lerner explained during the final case briefing. He created the disappearances, then controlled the narratives explaining them. His reputation as a dedicated ranger placed him above suspicion, while his involvement in the investigations gave him access to all evidence. For the families of Mason, Connor, and Ethan, the truth brought an agonizing mixture of closure and fresh grief. The recovery of their remains from locations documented in Travis's journals allowed for proper burials. 5 years after their disappearance, the joint funeral service brought together the three families in a moment of bittersweet closure. Elizabeth Pearson, Connor's mother, spoke briefly with reporters following the service. "Knowing is better than wondering," she said, her voice steady despite her evident exhaustion. "Even when the truth is more horrible than anything we imagined." The case fundamentally shook public confidence in wilderness safety protocols. Congressional hearings were held to examine how Montgomery's crimes had remained undetected for so long. The National Park Service implemented comprehensive reforms, including mandatory psychological evaluations for rangers, enhanced supervision of solo patrols, and new protocols for investigating deaths in wilderness areas. For Olivia Reynolds, the resolution came at an enormous personal cost. The months of investigation had left her financially devastated, her savings depleted, her career in ecology derailed, her personal relationships strained or broken. The recognition she received for her persistence, including a commendation from the FBI and features in national media, seemed hollow against the backdrop of her losses. "The truth doesn't bring anyone back," she told a documentary filmmaker a year after Travis's death. "But it does prevent others from being taken from us." In the aftermath, Olivia channeled her investigative skills and newfound public platform into creating the Mason Reynolds Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to reviewing closed cases of disappearances in wilderness areas, with particular focus on deaths attributed to natural causes without conclusive evidence. The foundation's work began modestly, with Olivia and 2 volunteer forensic specialists reviewing case files from national parks across the American West. Their methodology was rigorous, combining scientific analysis with the same persistent questioning that had characterized Olivia's search for her brother. Within 3 years, the foundation had helped resolve 8 cold cases, including 3 that identified human causes behind deaths previously attributed to accidents or animal attacks. More significantly, their advocacy led to the establishment of new investigative protocols for wilderness disappearances, mandating comprehensive forensic analysis even when natural causes seemed evident. The Wyoming Tourism Board, initially resistant to the foundation's work for fear it would damage the state's outdoor recreation image, eventually became a supporter. They recognized that improved safety protocols and transparent investigations ultimately strengthened visitor confidence. Walter Cartwright, the regional superintendent who had pressed for the original case closure, resigned following an internal investigation that revealed he had deliberately suppressed evidence questioning the bear attack theory. The investigation stopped short of finding him complicit in Travis's crimes, but documented a pattern of prioritizing tourism concerns over thorough investigations. Dr. Gregory Winters, the wildlife preservation chief who had been so vocal about confirming the bear attack theory, was found to have financial connections to a controversial real estate development near the park boundaries, a project temporarily suspended after the disappearances but quickly approved following the case's initial closure. He faced charges related to conflict of interest and tampering with federal wildlife reports. 5 years after Travis Montgomery's death, The case continued to reverberate through America's relationship with its wilderness areas. Safety protocols had been enhanced, but visitor numbers to national parks showed a subtle shift: more respectful engagement, less conquering attitude. Park rangers reported increased compliance with safety guidelines and weather advisories. The bear that had involuntarily played a role in Travis's deception, the animal nicknamed Thunder, whose den had been used to plant evidence, was monitored by wildlife biologists after its relocation. The tracking data showed it had successfully established a new territory in a remote area of Grand Teton National Park, far from regular human contact. In a quiet gesture that received no public attention, Olivia visited the site of her brother's last known camp at Lewis Lake on the 5th anniversary of the case's resolution. The pristine winter landscape bore no trace of the tragedy that had unfolded there, the lake's surface frozen into a mirror reflecting the surrounding mountains. She placed Mason's titanium compass watch, returned to the family after serving its purpose as evidence, on a rock near the shore. The watch's face caught the winter sunlight, sending a brief flash across the snow-covered expanse. The hardest part wasn't discovering what happened, Olivia later wrote in the Foundation's annual report. It was confronting the reality that the monster wasn't hiding in the wilderness. He was wearing a uniform, carrying a badge, and had spent years perfecting his camouflage, the very authority tasked with keeping people safe. The case of Mason Reynolds, Connor Pearson, and Ethan Webb fundamentally changed how Americans view danger in wild places. The narrative shifted from fear of animal predators to a more nuanced understanding that wilderness holds multiple threats, some with claws and fangs, others hidden behind human faces and official credentials. For those working in wilderness safety, the legacy of the case became a solemn reminder that vigilance must extend beyond natural hazards. The most dangerous predator in any environment remains the one that walks on two legs, thinks strategically, and understands precisely how to exploit trust and authority. As one park ranger told new recruits during their orientation at Yellowstone, "The wilderness doesn't care if you live or die, it's purely indifferent. It's humans who make moral choices, who decide to harm or help. Our job isn't just protecting people from nature. Sometimes it's protecting them from those who claim to represent it." The transformation of the case from an apparent animal attack to one of the most disturbing serial predator revelations in national park history serves as a chilling reminder of how easily narratives can be manipulated when they align with expected patterns and comfortable assumptions. For the families of those lost to Travis Montgomery's calculated violence, no resolution could ever be truly complete. But in establishing the truth, they created a foundation for both personal healing and systemic change, ensuring that future disappearances would be investigated with the skepticism, thoroughness, and persistence that Olivia Reynolds had demonstrated in her search for answers. The wilderness remains a place of both beauty and danger, where humans are neither conquerors nor guaranteed victims, but participants in an ancient relationship requiring both respect and vigilance. The true predators, as the case revealed, can emerge from unexpected sources, sometimes from the very systems designed to protect us, wearing the camouflage of authority and trust. As visitation to Yellowstone gradually returned to normal levels in the years that followed, visitors often paused at a small, unobtrusive memorial plaque near Lewis Lake. The simple bronze marker bears no dramatic language, just 3 names and a date, followed by a quote attributed to Mason Reynolds from his final message. "Nature challenges us, we accept." The true challenge, as his sister discovered, wasn't just surviving the wilderness, but uncovering the truth when human predators hide within its vast and silent spaces.